Hello everyone, and welcome to my Bold and Beautiful Gossips 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Finn had never felt such an overwhelming sense of tension between him and his partner, a tension that seemed to twist tighter with every passing day, like a storm that had been brewing silently, unseen but inevitably approaching, and it started in the small moments, small disagreements that once might have seemed trivial, now escalating into sharp words, cold stares, and heavy silences that lingered long after they left the room, and he found himself replaying every conversation in his mind, analyzing every tone, every pause, every expression, wondering if he had said the wrong thing, if he had missed some subtle sign of unhappiness, if somehow he had failed to see the cracks forming even as he tried to pour his heart into the relationship, tried to offer support and love, tried to be the person his partner could rely on no matter what. Yet despite his best efforts, something had shifted, something had changed in the air between them, an unspoken tension that felt like a cold weight pressing on his chest every time he entered the room, and Finn felt both frustration and helplessness, a confusing mix of emotions that left him restless at night, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what had gone wrong, thinking about the moments when laughter had seemed effortless, when the connection had felt unbreakable, when every shared smile had carried the promise of a future together. And now he wondered if those moments had been illusions, if the cracks had always been there, hidden beneath the surface, waiting for the right time to show themselves, and the memory of recent arguments replayed vividly in his mind. The one last week about a miscommunication that had blown up into a full-blown disagreement, voices raised, hearts racing, words exchanged that could never be taken back, apologies whispered but never truly felt, attempts at reconciliation met with guarded responses. And Finn remembered the look in his partner's eyes. A mixture of hurt and disappointment, a look that cut through him more deeply than any angry words ever could, and he remembered feeling a sudden panic, a desperate need to fix what had been broken, yet also a gnawing fear that no matter how hard he tried, the distance between them was growing, a widening chasm he didn't know how to bridge, and he thought about the trust that had always been the foundation of their relationship, the trust that now felt fragile, like it could shatter at the slightest touch, and Finn wondered if he had taken it for granted, if he had assumed that love alone would be enough to keep them together, without realizing that relationships required constant care, constant attention, constant communication, and he admitted to himself that perhaps he had been too focused on his own struggles, on his own challenges in life, to notice the quiet signs of dissatisfaction, the subtle shifts in mood, the tiny cracks that hinted at deeper issues. And now those issues had surfaced, raw and undeniable, and Finn couldn't ignore them any longer, no matter how much he wanted to believe that things could just go back to the way they were. Because life didn't work that way, and relationships didn't heal themselves without effort, and Finn knew he had to confront the situation head-on, had to face the discomfort, the awkwardness, the emotional intensity of a heart-to-heart conversation that he both dreaded and knew was necessary, and he rehearsed in his mind how he would begin, how he would express his feelings without blame, how he would listen without judgment, how he would show that he cared deeply, that he wanted to repair the rift, that he was willing to fight for them. But even as he thought about it, doubts crept in, doubts that made his stomach knot, doubts about whether words alone could mend the growing silence, doubts about whether time had already done irreparable damage, and Finn remembered the nights when they had stayed up talking for hours, sharing dreams, secrets, fears, and now the thought of those nights made him ache with longing, because the connection they once had now seemed fragile, precarious, hanging by a thread that neither of them dared to touch too firmly, and he realized that part of the rift was not just about specific disagreements, but about the accumulation of stress, misunderstandings, and unmet expectations that had quietly piled up over time, a mountain of small disappointments that now loomed large in their lives, casting shadows over moments that should have been filled with warmth and joy. And he thought about how easy it was for resentment to creep in, for silence to become a barrier, for hearts to harden when communication falters, and Finn felt a deep, painful recognition that the rift wasn't something that could be solved overnight, wasn't something that could be ignored in the hope that it would disappear, and he also knew that avoidance only made the distance grow, that every unspoken word added weight to a burden neither of them had asked to carry, and he felt the weight acutely, pressing on his chest, reminding him that love, no matter how strong, required vulnerability, honesty, and courage, all things that felt frightening when emotions ran high and fear of rejection hovered like a specter, and Finn realized that he had to summon all his strength, all his emotional resilience, to face the reality of the situation, to acknowledge his own faults, to accept responsibility where it was due, and to reach out with an open heart even if the response wasn't what he hoped for, because without that courage, there would be no chance at healing, no chance at reconciliation, and the thought of losing the closeness they once shared filled him with an almost unbearable sorrow, a grief for what might be slipping away even as he fought to hold on. And Finn also understood that the rift affected not just their emotional connection, but the very way they interacted, the daily routines, the casual gestures, the comfort of simple familiarity, all of which now felt strained, awkward, tinged with tension, and he noticed it in himself too, the hesitation to reach out, the careful measuring of words, the fear of triggering another argument, the anxiety that every small gesture might be misinterpreted. And he knew that these feelings mirrored what his partner must be experiencing, which made him even more determined to address the problem with patience and empathy, to create a safe space where both of them could speak freely, where both of them could be heard and understood without fear of judgment or retaliation. And he imagined what that conversation might look like, the initial awkwardness, the hesitant admissions, the raw honesty, the emotional breakthroughs, the shared vulnerability, and the potential for rebuilding trust, for reconnecting in a way that was even stronger than before. But he also braced himself for the possibility that it might not go as planned, that emotions could run high, that old wounds could be reopened, that misunderstandings could escalate. And yet he knew that avoiding the conversation altogether would be far worse, that silence was a slow poison to the heart, that unresolved tension could fester and grow until it became insurmountable. And Finn reflected on the importance of timing, of choosing a moment when both were ready to listen, to be honest, to face the discomfort together. And he considered what words might convey his deepest intentions, how to express his love while acknowledging the hurt, how to demonstrate his commitment to making things right. And he also understood that listening was as critical as speaking, that hearing his partner's perspective fully, without interruption or defensiveness, was essential to bridging the gap, to understanding the root of the rift, and to finding common ground from which to rebuild. And in that moment of introspection, Finn felt a renewed sense of purpose, a determination to fight for the relationship with integrity, empathy, and patience, recognizing that love was not just an emotion but a choice, a daily effort, a willingness to confront pain, to endure discomfort, and to keep striving for connection even when it seemed fragile or distant. And he resolved to act, to be present, to engage fully, to offer understanding, to apologize sincerely where needed, to affirm his commitment, to rebuild trust brick by brick, acknowledging that the path would be challenging, that setbacks could occur, that emotions would fluctuate, but believing deeply that with honesty, courage, and persistence, the rift could be healed, that the love they shared could survive the storm, and perhaps emerge even stronger, infused with a deeper understanding, a more resilient bond, and a renewed appreciation for the preciousness of what they had together. And as he sat quietly, reflecting on all of this, Finn felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, but also a flicker of hope, a reminder that love, even when tested, could endure. And he knew that the next steps he took, the words he spoke, the gestures he made, would determine the future of their relationship. And he steeled himself for the challenge, ready to face the discomfort, ready to embrace the vulnerability, ready to fight for the love he believed in, because the alternative, the slow unraveling, the widening distance, the potential loss, was a thought he could not bear. And with that resolve, Finn took a deep breath, letting go of fear, letting go of pride, preparing to confront the rift with an open heart, and to do everything in his power to restore the connection that meant everything to him, knowing that love was never simple, never guaranteed, but always worth the effort, worth the risk, worth the courage it demanded. And as he rose, he carried with him both the weight of the past and the hope for the future, determined to face the challenges ahead, determined to mend what had been broken, determined to fight for love, determined to heal the rift, because some bonds, no matter how strained, were worth every struggle, every tear, every vulnerable confession, every step taken toward understanding, toward reconciliation, toward a love that could weather the storms and emerge stronger, wiser, and more deeply connected than ever before. And Finn knew that while the path would be difficult, it was the path he had to take, the only path that could lead back to the closeness, intimacy, and trust he so deeply valued. And with that understanding, he embraced the journey ahead with a mixture of apprehension and hope, ready to confront the rift, ready to heal, ready to love fully once again. The days following Finn's decision to confront the tension in his relationship were anything but easy. The atmosphere between him and his partner was thick with unspoken words, heavy with the residue of past arguments, and Finn felt as though every movement, every glance, every fleeting expression was loaded with hidden meaning, as if the air itself had become charged with an electric current that could spark at any moment, and he noticed that even routine interactions carried an underlying fragility, a sense of walking on eggshells that made him anxious and hyper-aware of his own reactions, constantly second-guessing the tone of his voice, the choice of his words, the timing of his gestures, and he realized that the rift had transformed the familiar space of their home into a kind of minefield, where a single misstep could set off a cascade of hurt feelings, misunderstandings, and defensive reactions, and that awareness both terrified and motivated him, because he understood that, while caution was necessary, overthinking could be equally damaging, and Finn wrestled with the paradox of wanting to express himself fully while also protecting the delicate balance they were struggling to maintain, and he reflected on the moments that had led them here, moments that had seemed insignificant at the time but now loomed large in memory. The missed phone calls, the subtle irritations, the small disappointments, the times he had been preoccupied with work or distracted by responsibilities and hadn't noticed the quiet pull of distance growing between them, and he wondered if his partner felt the same pangs of regret, the same longing for connection that gnawed at him, because love, he realized, was not static and even the strongest bonds could fray if neglected, and the thought of having allowed that to happen filled him with an ache that seemed to settle into his bones, a constant, aching reminder that he had to act, had to fight, had to bridge the widening gap. Before it became too late, and Finn tried to reach out, attempted gestures of tenderness and understanding, small acts meant to signal his commitment and his desire to repair the damage, but he found that even these attempts were met with hesitation, with guarded responses that made him pause, make him question whether his partner was truly ready to engage, to be vulnerable, to admit hurt and fear. And that hesitation in turn fueled a cycle of anxiety that made every interaction feel like a test, a delicate balancing act where the stakes were impossibly high, and Finn recognized that trust, once shaken, could not simply be restored with words alone. It required patience, consistency, and proof of genuine intent, and he felt both exhausted and determined, caught between the weight of responsibility and the flicker of hope that still lingered, a hope that told him if they could just communicate honestly, if they could just open their hearts fully, the rift could be healed, and he thought about the conversations he had rehearsed countless times in his mind, imagining the ideal balance of confession, apology, reassurance, and listening, but he knew real life rarely conformed to rehearsed scripts, and he braced himself for the unpredictability of emotions, the sudden flare-ups, the misunderstandings that could spiral out of control, and it wasn't long before the first true confrontation occurred. A confrontation that neither of them could avoid any longer, a clash that brought all of the suppressed tension and unspoken frustrations to the surface, and Finn felt the weight of it immediately, the sharp edge of words cutting deeper than he expected, the sting of accusations, the raw emotion in every tone, and yet beneath the storm of anger and hurt, there was a thread of vulnerability, a glimpse of the shared love that had once been effortless, and he clung to that thread, desperate to guide the conversation toward understanding rather than escalation, toward connection rather than alienation, and he listened as his partner poured out feelings Finn had only begun to sense, feelings of neglect, of unacknowledged needs, of the loneliness that had quietly crept into their days, and he realized that this honesty, while painful, was also a chance, an opportunity to see the depth of hurt and the ways he had unintentionally contributed to it, and he responded not with defensiveness, but with acknowledgement, with heartfelt apologies, with promises to do better, with explanations not as excuses but as context, and he tried to show that he understood, that he cared, that he was willing to invest whatever it took to rebuild trust, to heal the rift, to nurture the love that had been tested but not broken, and the conversation stretched on for hours, alternating between tears, frustration, and tentative moments of reconnection, moments that offered glimpses of hope amid the turbulence. And Finn felt drained but also strangely energized, aware that the path to healing was never linear, never simple, and that it required constant effort, repeated acts of honesty and care, and the willingness to endure discomfort for the sake of long-term intimacy. And yet despite the effort, he noticed that the tension didn't completely dissipate. Remnants lingered, subtle reminders that scars, even when addressed, do not vanish immediately, and he knew there would be setbacks, moments when old habits and unspoken resentments threatened to resurface, and he braced himself for those moments, determined to face them with patience and openness rather than fear or avoidance, because he understood that avoiding conflict or suppressing feelings only allowed the rift to fester, to grow, and Finn wanted no part of letting that happen. And as the days continued, the rift manifested in new ways, in small disagreements, in miscommunications, in moments of irritability or withdrawal, and Finn found himself constantly aware of the delicate balance, constantly checking in, constantly striving to maintain connection without smothering, to offer support without pressure, to listen without judgment, and the emotional labor weighed heavily on him, yet he accepted it as necessary, as a testament to the depth of his commitment and the value he placed on the relationship, and he reflected on the resilience required to endure such trials, the courage needed to face emotional vulnerability, the humility required to admit mistakes, and the empathy essential to understand his partner's perspective fully, and he drew on memories of shared joys, of laughter and intimacy, of moments that reminded him why he loved so fiercely, why he refused to give up despite the difficulty, and he noticed subtle changes as well, the small acknowledgments of effort, the tentative gestures of reconciliation, the brief flashes of warmth and connection that reminded him that their bond, though tested, was still alive, still capable of growth and renewal, and Finn realized that healing a rift was not about erasing the past, but about learning from it, about creating new patterns of trust and communication, about cultivating patience and understanding, and he began to see that even the pain and struggle had value, teaching lessons about himself, about love, about the fragility and resilience of human connection, and he felt a mixture of exhaustion and hope, a recognition that the journey was ongoing, that the work was continuous, yet also a deep, abiding belief that the effort was worthwhile, because love in its truest form required perseverance, dedication and courage, and Finn resolved to continue showing up fully, to continue listening, speaking, caring and striving, to meet his partner where they were emotionally, and to navigate the highs and lows with honesty, empathy and compassion, because the alternative, apathy, withdrawal, resignation, was unacceptable, and he reminded himself that relationships were dynamic, ever-changing, demanding flexibility, adaptability and resilience, and he was ready to rise to the challenge, even as he acknowledged the uncertainty of the path ahead, the possibility of missteps, the risk of misunderstandings, and yet, in that awareness, he found a strange comfort, reminder that the effort itself was meaningful, that love was measured not by ease or perfection but by commitment, courage, and the willingness to engage deeply, to face pain, to nurture growth, to invest in connection, and as he continued this daily work, Finn noticed gradual changes, the subtle easing of tension, the moments of laughter returning, the renewed intimacy of quiet gestures, the gentle rebuilding of trust, the cautious but hopeful glances that signaled mutual understanding, and he felt a sense of accomplishment and relief, tempered by the knowledge that vigilance and care were still required, that the rift, though healing, was a reminder of fragility, of the necessity of ongoing effort, and he embraced this awareness, seeing it not as a burden but as an opportunity to deepen love, to strengthen the bond, to cultivate a relationship that could withstand future challenges, and he reflected on the lessons learned, about communication, empathy, patience, the importance of addressing issues promptly, the value of vulnerability, and the power of shared commitment, and he carried these lessons forward with determination, aware that the journey of healing was ongoing, that moments of doubt and difficulty would recur, yet confident that with honesty, openness and care, the relationship could endure, grow and flourish, and in that commitment, Finn found both purpose and hope, a renewed belief in love's resilience, and a readiness to face whatever challenges lay ahead, fully present, fully engaged, and unwavering in his devotion, because some bonds, once tested and survived, emerged stronger, wiser, and more deeply connected than ever before, and Finn vowed to ensure that their love would be one of those bonds, a testament to perseverance, understanding, and the enduring power of commitment in the face of life's inevitable trials, and as he navigated each day, each conversation, each delicate interaction, he held fast to that vow, carrying it in every word, every gesture, every heartbeat, knowing that the rift, though painful, had become a catalyst for growth, for deeper intimacy, and for a love that was, in the truest sense, unbreakable, not because it was free from struggle, but because it had faced struggle and endured, stronger and more profound for it.